The Sumerian desert stretched, a canvas of scorched sand and unforgiving sun. Winds hot and fierce whipped across the dunes, carrying with them whispers of forgotten times. They spoke of ancient secrets buried beneath the sands, of lost cities and forgotten gods. And they whispered of a place feared by men, a place where shadows danced and darkness held dominion. The Temple of Shadows. Even the name sent shivers down the spines of the bravest desert nomads. It stood, half swallowed by the sands of time, a monument to a forgotten age. Its once proud towers were now jagged teeth against the unforgiving sky, its entrance a gaping maw, promising oblivion. Within those crumbling walls, legend claimed, lay a treasure unlike any other, the Black Obelisk. It was said to be a conduit to unimaginable power, a key to unlocking the secrets of life and death. But such power came at a price. The desert winds carried tales of those foolish enough to seek the obelisk, tales of madness and death, of souls devoured by the shadows. For centuries, the whispers remained just that, whispers carried on the wind. But fate, it seemed, had a way of stirring the sands of time. And on this day, beneath the scorching gaze of the Sumerian sun, a group of adventurers stood poised to tempt the wrath of the Black Obelisk. 4 figures, silhouetted against the harsh glare of the desert sun, prepared for their journey into the heart of legend. They were an unlikely quartet, drawn together by fate and a thirst for adventure. Darius, the seasoned warrior, adjusted the straps of his armor.
Let's make sure we're ready for whatever comes our way.
Kira, the huntress, tested the tension of her bowstring. Orion, the scholar, traced ancient symbols with his finger. And then there was Xander, the thief, his eyes darting about, ever watchful.
Let's get moving.
The desert wind, now a scorching breath against their faces, seemed to howl a warning as the 4 adventurers approached the Temple of Shadows. It loomed before them, a monument to forgotten gods and ancient evils.
It's just stone and sand. Let the dead keep their treasures. We'll take our chances.
His words were meant to bolster the group's courage, but even he felt a prickle of unease as he stepped into the temple's shadow. But this temple, it felt different. It felt like a predator's maw, waiting to swallow them whole.
Stay alert. This place feels wrong.
The entrance to the Temple of Shadows was a gaping maw of darkness, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay. As the adventurers crossed the threshold, the sunlight seemed to retreat as if repelled by the ancient evil that clung to the stones. Darius, drawing his sword, the metal ringing in the sudden silence, took the lead.
Stay close. We don't know what's waiting for us inside.
Orion, squinting in the gloom, held aloft a flickering torch, the dancing flames casting grotesque shadows on the temple walls. The carvings, barely visible in the dim light, depicted scenes of unimaginable horror. Creatures with twisted limbs and gnashing teeth, their eyes burning with malevolent glee as they tore at the flesh of screaming victims.
By the gods, these carvings aren't just decorations.
They spoke of sacrifices made and prices paid, of souls devoured by the darkness that dwelled within the temple's heart. Xander, his usual swagger faltering in the face of the temple's oppressive atmosphere, ran a hand nervously across his beard.
Just carvings. Dead things can't hurt us.
But even as he spoke, he couldn't help but notice the way the shadows seemed to deepen around them, as if the temple itself were listening.
Don't tempt fate, Xander. These markings, they're warnings. We need to be careful now more than ever.
He hefted his sword, his gaze sweeping the shadows, his every sense on alert. The air within the temple grew colder, the silence broken only by the sound of their own breathing and the soft crunch of sand beneath their feet. They walked single file, Darius leading the way, his sword gleaming in the flickering torchlight. Orion close behind, his eyes darting from the carvings on the walls to the path ahead.
The air felt heavy, oppressive, as if we were walking through a nightmare made manifest. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to flee the suffocating darkness of the temple.
Xander, bringing up the rear, shivered, and it wasn't entirely from the cold. The carvings, the shadows, the oppressive silence, it all conspired to unnerve him. He longed for the familiar weight of gold in his pouch, for the feel of the open desert beneath his feet. There was something profoundly wrong about this place, something that chilled him to the very bone.
We should turn back. This place, it's wrong.
But even as he spoke, he knew his words would fall on deaf ears. They had come too far, risked too much to turn back now. The adventurers pressed deeper into the bowels of the temple, their progress slow and cautious. The air grew heavy, thick with the weight of centuries, each breath carrying the scent of decay and the tang of something ancient and evil. The passage they followed twisted and turned, a labyrinth of darkness designed to confound and disorient.
These writings, they speak of a time before time, of the old gods and their terrible power.
Kyra, her hand resting lightly on her bow, her senses on high alert, felt a shiver run down her spine. The silence of the temple was unnerving, broken only by the sound of their own footsteps and the faint whisper of the wind that seemed to emanate from the very stones themselves.
Do you hear that? I could swear.
It's just the wind, Kyra, nothing to be afraid of.
But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that unseen eyes followed their every move. Xander, his usual bravado noticeably absent, lagged behind the others, his gaze darting nervously from shadow to shadow.
I don't like this. This whole place, it feels wrong.
But there was no turning back now. They had come too far, risked too much. They were committed to seeing this through, no matter the cost. The passage opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in the impenetrable darkness above. The air hung heavy with a palpable sense of dread. In the center, bathed in a shaft of moonlight, stood the black Obelisk. It was taller than a man, hewn from an obsidian-like stone, radiating immense power. Strange symbols pulsed with an eerie light. Darius, gripping his sword, stared in awe and apprehension.
Incredible. The power, it's palpable.
He reached out, but Kira grabbed his arm.
Don't. The legends speak of a curse.
She trailed off, her gaze fixed on the obelisk. Xander, his greed forgotten, stepped back, reaching for his dagger. Xander, his gaze fixed on the obelisk, felt a strange pull, a compulsion that seemed to emanate from the heart of the ancient monolith. Greed warred with fear within him, the lure of untold riches battling against the instinctive dread that coiled in his gut. He took a step closer, drawn towards the obelisk as if by an invisible thread.
Don't, Xander.
He could feel the power emanating from the obelisk, a dark symphony of energy that thrummed through the air. His hand, as if possessed, reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold, smooth surface. The moment his flesh made contact, the chamber erupted in a blinding flash of white light. A wave of force slammed into him, throwing him backwards. When they could see again, they gasped in horror. The air around the obelisk shimmered and distorted, a vortex of shadows coalescing.
The legends, they spoke of a guardian, a being of pure shadow.
A low groan echoed through the chamber, a sound ancient and filled with malice. The shadows swirling around Xander writhed and pulsed, growing larger, taking on a shape both hideous and vaguely humanoid. Darius, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword, felt a chill crawl down his spine. This was no mere beast, no creature of flesh and blood. This was something born of darkness, something ancient and evil.
This was something different, something far more dangerous.
Kira, her fingers already wrapped around an arrow, notched it to her bowstring, her eyes narrowed, tracking the movements of the shadow. The air crackled with energy, the hair on the back of her neck prickling with a primal fear she hadn't felt since she was a child hunting boar in the dead of night. Orion, his face pale, stumbled back, clutching his tome as if it were a lifeline. He had spent his life studying ancient texts, poring over scrolls filled with forgotten lore. But nothing could have prepared him for this. The legends were true, the obelisk was cursed, and they had unleashed something terrible upon the world.
Xander!
Darius's voice echoed in the chamber, a desperate plea lost in the growing maelstrom of dark energy. But Xander didn't move. He lay sprawled on the ground, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths, his eyes staring blankly up at the ceiling, oblivious to the horror unfolding around him. The shadows coalesced, solidifying around Xander's prone form, wrapping him in a shroud of pure darkness. His struggles, at first frantic and desperate, gradually subsided as the shadows tightened their grip. Where moments before there had been a man, now there was only a silhouette, a void outlined against the backdrop of the chamber's gloom. A low growl, guttural and inhuman, emanated from the figure that was once Xander. It raised its head, and though they could see no features, no eyes or mouth, they could feel its gaze, cold and predatory, raking over them like a physical touch. A wave of nausea washed over Darius, and he realized with a sickening certainty that the man he had traveled with, the rogue he had come to rely on, was gone.
Tearfully. He had always been quick to judge, quicker to condemn. But there had been a spark of humanity in Xander, a flicker of something good beneath the layers of greed and self-preservation. Now that spark was extinguished, replaced by something cold and alien.
Kira, her hand trembling on her bowstring, felt a tear roll down her cheek. Orion, clutching his tome to his chest like a shield, muttered a silent prayer to whatever gods might still be listening. He had spent his life seeking knowledge, believing that understanding could conquer any darkness. But in the face of such raw, primal evil, he felt hopelessly outmatched, a child playing with forces he could barely comprehend. The figure that was once Xander moved with a speed that defied comprehension, a blur of shadows that slammed into Darius before the warrior even had time to react.
Reacting instinctively, Kira released her arrow.
Struggling to his feet, his chest aching, his head spinning, Darius saw the look on Kira's face, the fear in her eyes, and he knew they were outmatched. Run!
Kyra, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, didn't need to be told twice.
Orion, his old legs protesting every step, struggled to keep up his precious tome clutched tightly to his chest. The temple, once a place of worship, was now their prison, its corridors twisting and turning, designed to confuse and disorient. They burst into a vast hall, its ceiling lost in the shadows above.
This place...
Those who came before, he gasped, his voice trembling. Those who sought the Obelisk's power and paid the ultimate price.
Xander's laughter, distorted and laced with a chilling glee, echoed through the hall. The creature, no longer content to simply hunt them, was toying with them.
They fled deeper into the temple's bowels, the air growing colder, the passageways narrower.
We're lost, hopelessly outmatched, trapped in a maze designed by something ancient and evil.
We came here seeking knowledge, seeking adventure.
I will fight, of course, but deep down I know it's a futile gesture.
Darius, his breath ragged in his chest, his muscles screaming for respite, knew they couldn't outrun the shadows forever.
There!
The gem of Amun-Ra. Legends say it holds the power of the sun, a beacon against the forces of darkness.
Then we find it. Find this gem or die trying.
They had faced death countless times, stared into the abyss, and emerged victorious. This time, the stakes were higher, but they still had a chance. They pressed onward, their pace fueled by a desperate hope.
It's beautiful.
Incredible, the legends were true. It truly does radiate the power of the sun.
Careful, old friend. Where there is light, there is often shadow.
As if summoned by their approach, the air in the chamber crackled with a sudden surge of energy.
You cannot escape. The darkness claims all.
This is it, our final stand.
We've come too far to surrender now.
We must hold our ground.
Darius raised his sword, the steel gleaming dully in the eerie light emanating from the gem of Amun-Ra.
We can't hold them off forever.
The Obelisk. The creature draws its power from the Obelisk. If we can destroy it...
We have to cut it off from its source. Kira, with me.
Darius roared, his voice echoing through the chamber. Kyra, her instincts honed from a lifetime spent in the wild, didn't hesitate. They ran as if the hounds of hell were on their heels, their lungs burning, their muscles screaming for respite. They burst into the obelisk chamber, their chests heaving. Darius, his face a mask of grim determination, wasted no time. He raised the gem of Amun-Ra, its light blazing like a miniature sun in the heart of the temple's darkness. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The darkness that had pervaded the temple, the oppressive weight that had pressed down on them, was gone. replaced by an almost palpable silence.